The October sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Cedar Ridge, turning the air thick with heat and the stench of horse manure. The weekly market was in full swing, with townsfolk haggling over everything from bolts of calico to sacks of flour. But today, something different drew the crowd's attention, something that made even the most hardened frontiersmen pause and stare. Near the livestock pens, where cattle lowed and chickens squawked in their crates, a small gathering had formed. Men in worn leather chaps and sweat-stained hats passed around a bottle of whiskey, their laughter harsh and ugly. Women in their Sunday dresses stood at a distance, whispering behind gloved hands, their eyes gleaming with a mixture of scandal and satisfaction. At the center of it all stood Clara Thornton. She was 23, though the past year had aged her beyond those years. Her once lustrous auburn hair hung limp beneath a faded bonnet, and her green eyes that her late husband Samuel had once compared to spring meadows, now stared ahead with the hollow gaze of someone who had learned not to hope. Her dress, black bombazine worn thin at the elbows and hem, marked her as a widow. The bruise yellowing on her left cheekbone marked her as something else entirely. "Step right up, gentlemen," bellowed Josiah Thornton, Clara's brother-in-law. He was a thick-necked brute of a man who ran the local feed store and never missed a chance to remind folks of it. "Got ourselves a special bargain today. One widow, barely used, in exchange for a good pair of boots." The crowd erupted in laughter. Someone shouted, "What's wrong with her, Josiah? She lame?" "Nothing wrong that a firm hand won't fix," Josiah replied, grabbing Clara's arm and spinning her around like she was a horse at auction. "She can cook, clean, mend clothes. Hell, she even knows her letters, if you're into that sort of thing." Clara stumbled but didn't fall. She'd learned over the past months that showing weakness only made things worse. When Samuel had died at Chickamauga, shot through the chest by Confederate grape shot, she'd thought that was the worst life could offer. She'd been wrong. "I'll give you my old boots for her," cackled Ephraim Pike. "The town drunk. Got a hole in the soul, but she's got holes in her soul." He slapped his knee at his own wit. Martha Thornton, Clara's mother-in-law, stood nearby with her arms crossed over her ample bosom. "Should have done this months ago," she announced to anyone who'd listen. "Girl's been nothing but a burden since my Samuel passed. Eats like a bird but costs like a horse, and barren to boot. 3 years of marriage and not one grandchild to show for it." The lie stung worse than any blow. Clara had been with child when the news of Samuel's death arrived. The shock and grief, combined with Martha's first beating, had ended that hope in blood and agony. But defending herself was pointless. In this world, a widow without protection was worth less than livestock. "Come now," Josiah continued, warming to his task. "Surely someone needs a woman around the place. She don't eat much, and she's past the silly age. Won't give you no trouble." At the edge of the crowd, leaning against the fence that separated the market from the horse corrals, stood a man who didn't laugh. Eli Calhoun was 34 years old and had the kind of presence that made other men step aside without quite knowing why. Standing 6 feet 2 inches in worn boots, he cut an imposing figure even in stillness. His face, weathered by sun and wind, rarely showed emotion. Gray eyes the color of winter sky took in everything and revealed nothing. He'd come to town for supplies, salt, flour, ammunition, nothing more. The spectacle disgusted him. But then again, most things about town life did these days. He'd built his ranch 20 miles out for a reason. The isolation suited him fine, but something about the woman's bearing caught his attention. She stood there, subjected to the worst kind of humiliation. Yet her spine remained straight. Her hands, though trembling slightly, were clasped in front of her with dignity. She wasn't crying, she wasn't begging, she was enduring. It reminded him of something, someone he'd rather forget. "Well," Josiah was saying, "do I hear any takers? Good boots, good quality, better than what she's worth, that's certain." The crowd laughed again. Someone suggested they throw in a bottle of whiskey to sweeten the deal. Another man offered a pair of spurs instead, to help ride her proper. Clara's eyes flickered then, just for a moment. She looked across the crowd as if searching for something. Hope, perhaps. Or maybe just a face that wasn't twisted in mockery. Her gaze met Eli's. He should have looked away. Should have finished his business and ridden out. He had no room in his life for complications. And a woman, any woman, was the biggest complication of all. But those eyes held him, green like sage after rain, with depths of sorrow that matched his own. "No takers?" Josiah asked, his voice taking on an edge of frustration. "Come on, boys. I'm practically giving her away. Hell, at this point I'd take a half-decent saddle blanket. Or a sack of grain," someone shouted. "Or a three-legged dog. At least the dog would be loyal." The laughter grew crueler. Martha Thornton stepped forward. "Maybe we should just turn her out. Let her find her own way, though I doubt even the sporting houses would take something so used up." Clara's hands tightened their grip on each other, knuckles white. Still, she said nothing. Eli pushed himself off the fence. The crowd didn't notice him at first. He moved with the quiet purpose of a man who'd learned that the loudest threats were usually the emptiest. It wasn't until he stood directly in front of Josiah that conversations began to die. "You want boots?" Eli's voice was low, gravelly from disuse. He rarely spoke to anyone beyond what business required. Josiah's eyes narrowed, then widened with recognition. Everyone knew of Eli Calhoun, though few knew him personally. He ran cattle on some of the harshest land in the territory and made it profitable through sheer will and harder work. He paid his debts, kept his word, and had once shot a man in Carson City, though the details of that incident remained murky. "That's right," Josiah said, recovering his bluster. "Good boots. Quality leather." Without a word, Eli bent and pulled off his own boots. They were good ones, hand-tooled leather from San Antonio, barely a year old. He stood there in his stocking feet on the hot, dusty ground, holding the boots out. The crowd fell silent. Josiah licked his lips. "Well, now, those are fine boots. Yes or no?" Eli asked. Martha Thornton stepped forward. "Now wait just a minute. We ought to discuss." "Yes or no?" Eli repeated, his gray eyes fixed on Josiah. "Yes," Josiah said quickly, grabbing the boots. "Yes, it's a deal." Eli nodded once, then turned to Clara. For the first time in months, she looked genuinely startled. The hollow acceptance in her eyes flickered with confusion, perhaps even fear. "Ma'am," he said simply, then gestured toward the street where his horse waited. Clara looked from him to the Thorntons to the crowd. No one spoke. No one knew what to say. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. You want me to come with you?" Her voice was hoarse from disuse. That was the deal. She took a step forward, then another. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Some of the women looked scandalized. Some of the men looked envious. Most just looked confused. As they reached his horse, a sturdy bay gelding built for endurance rather than speed, Eli pulled a spare pair of boots from his saddlebag. Cheaper ones, but serviceable. He put them on without comment, then offered Clara his hand. She stared at it for a long moment. How long had it been since anyone had offered her courtesy instead of cruelty? Finally, carefully, as if the hand might be withdrawn at any moment. She took it. He helped her onto the horse, then swung up behind her. The crowd watched in stunned silence as he turned the bay's head west, toward the mountains and the vast emptiness beyond. As they rode past the last buildings of Cedar Ridge, Clara felt the weight of 100 eyes on her back. She didn't know what lay ahead, didn't know if she'd traded one form of servitude for another. But for the first time in a year, she was leaving the Thorntons behind. The man behind her, this stranger who'd traded his boots for her life, said nothing. His arm came around her to hold the reins, careful not to touch more than necessary. He smelled of leather and horse and the wild sage that grew in the high country. They rode into the afternoon sun, leaving the laughter and the shame behind. Ahead lay 20 miles of hard country and an uncertain future, but also, perhaps, something else. something neither of them had a name for yet. The last thing the townspeople saw was their silhouettes against the sky, growing smaller and smaller until the heat shimmer swallowed them whole. The sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains when they finally stopped to rest the horse. They'd been riding for 3 hours in complete silence, save for the steady clip-clop of hooves and the whisper of wind through the sagebrush. Clara's body ached from the unfamiliar position, and her throat was parched from the dust, but she didn't dare complain. Eli dismounted first, then offered his hand again. She took it, sliding down awkwardly, her legs nearly buckling from stiffness. He steadied her with a light touch on her elbow, then immediately stepped back. "Water," he said, unhooking a canteen from the saddle. "Drink slow." She accepted it gratefully, forcing herself to take small sips despite her thirst. While she drank, he tended to the horse, checking its hooves and adjusting the saddle. His movements were efficient, practiced, a man used to taking care of things himself. "How much farther?" she finally asked, her voice still rough. "Another 3 hours, maybe 4. We'll ride through dark." The prospect should have frightened her, heading into the wilderness with a stranger as night fell. Instead, she felt only a weary acceptance. Whatever awaited her couldn't be worse than what she'd left behind. They mounted again and continued west. The landscape changed as they climbed higher, trading the dusty flats for rocky terrain dotted with piñón pines and juniper. The air grew cooler, carrying the sharp scent of resin and something else, the promise of rain, perhaps, though the sky remained stubbornly clear. As darkness gathered, Eli produced a lantern but didn't light it. "Moon'll be up soon," he said. "Horse knows the way." And indeed, the bay picked its path with sure-footed confidence, even as shadows swallowed the trail. Clara found herself gripping the saddle horn, afraid of falling into the void that seemed to press in from all sides. Behind her, Eli remained steady as stone, guiding the horse with subtle shifts of weight and soft clicks of his tongue. The moon rose full and bright, transforming the landscape into a silver-washed dreamscape. Cliff faces loomed like ancient sentinels. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, answered by another, then another, until the night rang with their wild chorus. "Are we safe?" Clara asked, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. "They won't bother us, just singing." It was the longest string of words he'd spoken yet. Emboldened, she asked, "Why? Why what? Why did you buy me?" A long pause. Then, "Didn't buy you. Made a trade. For boots." "Yes. But why?" Another pause. Longer this time. When he finally spoke, his voice was even quieter than usual. Couldn't abide it. The laughing. She understood then, or thought she did. A moment of conscience, of human decency in a place that had shown her precious little of either. She should feel grateful. Instead, she felt hollow, used up. What would he expect in return for this gesture? She'd learned that kindness always came with a price. They created a rise, and below them, nestled in a valley between 2 ridges. She could make out the dark shapes of buildings. A house, a barn. What might be a chicken coop? No lights burned in any window. "Home," Eli said simply. The word sat strangely in Clara's mind. She'd had a home once, a 2-room cabin she'd shared with Samuel. With cheerful curtains she'd sewn herself and a garden patch out back. That life felt like something she'd dreamed. The horse picked up its pace, sensing oats and rest ahead. Soon they were in the yard, dogs emerging from the shadows to greet them with tail wags rather than barks. Eli dismounted and helped Clara down for the final time. "House is there," he said, pointing to the larger building. "I'll see to the horse." She stood uncertain in the moonlight, arms wrapped around herself against the mountain chill. "What should I do?" "Rest. We'll sort things come morning." He led the horse away, leaving her alone in the strange yard. The house loomed before her, dark and silent. After a moment's hesitation, she climbed the porch steps and tried the door. It opened easily. No locks out here, apparently. The interior was pitch black. She felt along the wall until her fingers found a table with matches and a lamp. Light bloomed, revealing a main room that served as both kitchen and living area. Everything was clean but sparse. A table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the fireplace, shelves lined with a few dishes and preserves. A man's space, functional and without softness. A door on the far wall led to a small bedroom. Another door revealed a second bedroom, this one clearly unused, with a narrow bed covered in a dusty quilt. Clara set the lamp on the dresser and sank onto the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. She should undress, should wash the road dust from her face, should do something. Instead, she sat there in the lamplight, hands folded in her lap, trying to make sense of the day. This morning she'd woken on a pallet in the Thorntons' barn, knowing she'd face another day of Martha's sharp tongue and sharper hands. Now she sat in a stranger's house, 20 miles from anywhere, her life traded for leather. The front door opened and closed. Footsteps crossed the main room, paused, then approached her door. A soft knock. "Ma'am, you settled?" "Yes," she managed. "Basin and pitcher on the dresser. Privy's out back. Follow the path. I'll be up at dawn, but you sleep as long as you need." His footsteps retreated. A door closed. Then silence. Clara finally roused herself to wash her face and hands, the cold water shocking her fully awake. She removed her boots and outer dress, but kept her chemise and petticoat on. The bed, when she finally crawled into it, was harder than she was used to, but clean. The quilt smelled of cedar and long disuse. She lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering if she should bar the door. But what was the point? If he meant her harm, a door wouldn't stop him. And if he didn't, well, she'd know soon enough. Exhaustion finally won. She slept fitfully, dreaming of Samuel's face and the sound of laughter and boots walking away across wooden floors. Dawn came gray and cold. Clara woke disoriented, then remembered where she was. She dressed quickly and ventured into the main room. Eli was already up, standing at the stove with his back to her, making coffee. "Morning," he said without turning. "Hungry." "I can cook," she said quickly. I'm a good cook." He turned then, studying her with those winter gray eyes. "Sit. You're a guest." "I'm not a guest. You traded for me. I should earn my keep." Something shifted in his expression. "Sit," he repeated, gentler this time. "Eat first, then we'll talk about the rest." She sat. He placed before her a plate of biscuits, fried eggs, and thick strips of bacon. Coffee black as midnight. Simple food, but more than she'd seen in months. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but she forced herself to eat slowly, properly. He sat across from her with his own plate, eating in methodical silence. Through the window, she could see the sun beginning to paint the mountain peaks gold and rose. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Gets old," he replied, but his eyes went to the view anyway. When they'd finished, she rose to clear the dishes. He didn't stop her this time. She washed while he dried, working in companionable quiet, domestic, almost normal, except for the strangeness of it all. "I should know what you expect," she said finally, hands deep in soapy water. "From me." He set down the plate he'd been drying. "Expect? You traded for me. I understand. I should know." His jaw tightened. "I expect nothing. You needed out. I had boots to spare. That's all. Nothing's that simple. Sometimes it is." She turned to face him, soap suds dripping from her hands. "Then what am I to do? I can't just exist here, taking your food, sleeping in your bed. It's a spare bed, and there's work plenty. If you want it, can't pay wages, but you'd have room and board. When you want to leave, I'll take you wherever you want to go." "And if I don't want to leave?" The question surprised them both. Color rose in her cheeks, but she held his gaze. "Then you don't," he said simply. "Your choice, always your choice." Choice. When had she last had one of those? She turned back to the dishes to hide the sudden sting of tears. The day established a pattern that would define the coming weeks. She insisted on taking over the household chores, cooking, cleaning, mending. He showed her around the property, the barn with its 4 horses and milk cow, the chicken coop, the vegetable garden gone mostly to seed. "Martha never let me tend a garden," she said wistfully, looking at the neglected rows. "It's yours if you want it. Seeds in the shed." Such simple words, but they meant everything. Something that could be hers. He worked from dawn to dusk, tending cattle, mending fences, hauling water. She learned his rhythms. Coffee before sunrise, out until noon, back for a quick meal, out again until dark. He was a man of few words but consistent habits. In the evenings, they sat by the fire. She mended clothes while he oiled tack or sharpened tools. Sometimes she read aloud from one of the few books on his shelf. The Bible, an almanac, a volume of poetry that surprised her. "Was my wife's," he said when she asked about it. "The first mention of her." "When did she pass?" 6 years back. Childbed fever. "I'm sorry," he nodded, staring into the fire. "Her name was Mary. Bought this land together, built it up from nothing. She was sunshine." Clara understood. Samuel had been her laughter, her tomorrow. Now they both sat in the gathering dark, 2 souls carved hollow by loss. That night, unable to sleep, she ventured onto the porch. The stars spread above like scattered diamonds on black velvet, beautiful and cold and impossibly distant. She didn't hear him approach until he spoke. "Can't sleep. Too quiet," she admitted. The Thorntons' barn was never quiet. Always something scurrying or creaking. He leaned against the porch post, a shadow among shadows. "Takes time, getting used to peace." "Is that what this is? Peace?" "Close as I found." They stood there in comfortable silence, 2 damaged souls beneath an infinite sky. She thought about asking him the real reason he'd traded for her, but perhaps it didn't matter. They were here now, working out an existence neither had planned. "Thank you," she said finally, "for bringing me here, for giving me choices." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Thank you for taking them." He went inside, leaving her with the stars and the vast Montana silence and the strange, unfamiliar feeling that might have been hope. The weeks folded into each other like pages in a book, each one revealing more of the story they were writing together. Clara threw herself into the work of the ranch with a fervor that surprised them both. She rose before dawn to start the stove, packed lunch for Eli to take to the far pastures, and transformed the neglected house into something approaching a home. The garden became her particular project. She cleared the weeds with methodical determination, her hands remembering skills learned in childhood. Eli brought her seeds from town, beans, squash, late cabbage that might survive the coming frost. She planted them with the reverence of someone placing hope in soil. "You'll need to haul water," he warned. "Rain's scarce this time of year." "I'm not afraid of work," she replied, dirt already under her fingernails. He watched her sometimes when he thought she wouldn't notice. The way she hummed while kneading bread, how she'd pause to watch the eagles circle overhead, the careful way she'd divided the last of the preserves so they'd both have equal portions. Small things that spoke of a generous spirit despite all she'd endured. One morning, she accompanied him to the barn to help with the milking. The cow, a placid Jersey named Buttercup, stood patiently while Clara fumbled with unfamiliar tasks. "Like this," Eli said, positioning her hands correctly. "Firm, but gentle. She'll let you know if you're doing it wrong." His hands covered hers, guiding the motion. It was the first time they'd truly touched since that initial day, and both pulled back as if burned. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I can manage," she said quickly. "I know you can." The moment passed, but something had shifted. They were more aware of each other now, the space between them when they passed in doorways, the careful distance maintained at the table, the way conversation faltered when their eyes met too long. 3 weeks into her stay, Clara fell. She'd been carrying water from the well to her garden, stubborn in her refusal to ask for help. The bucket was too full, the path uneven. Her foot caught on a root, and she went down hard, water soaking through her dress. Her palms scraped raw on the gravel. Eli appeared as if from nowhere, dropping the fence post he'd been setting. Clara. It was the first time he'd used her given name. She sat there in the mud, dress ruined, hands bleeding, and did something she hadn't done since Samuel's death. She laughed. Not the bitter laugh of despair, but genuine mirth at the absurdity of it all. I'm fine, she gasped between laughs. Just my pride that's bruised. But when she tried to stand, her ankle buckled. Eli caught her before she could fall again, and suddenly she was in his arms, held against his chest like something precious. I can walk, she protested. No, you can't. He carried her to the house as if she weighed nothing, setting her gently in the kitchen chair. His hands were infinitely careful as he examined her ankle, already beginning to swell. Not broken, he concluded, but you'll need to stay off it for a few days. The garden will survive. He cleaned her scraped palms with the same focused attention he gave to everything, wrapping them in clean cloth. Clara watched his bent head, the silver threading through his dark hair, the weathered lines around his eyes. A good man, she realized. Perhaps the first truly good man she'd known since Samuel. There, he said, sitting back. You'll mend. Their eyes met and held. Something electric passed between them, unnamed but undeniable. Clara's breath caught. Eli's hand still rested on her bandaged palm. A knock at the door shattered the moment. Eli frowned. They never had visitors. He opened the door to reveal Tom Porter from the neighboring ranch, hat in hand. Eli, Tom said, then noticed Clara. His eyes widened with recognition. Ma'am. Tom, Eli said, his voice carefully neutral. Something wrong? No, that is, the missus heard. He cleared his throat. We heard you had a woman staying here, the widow from town. Clara felt her stomach drop. Of course word would spread. Of course judgment would follow her even here. What of it? Eli's tone had gone cold. Nothing. That is, the missus wanted me to invite you both for Sunday dinner. She says it ain't proper. A woman being out here without... He caught Eli's expression and quickly amended. That is, she'd like to meet Mrs. Thornton, proper-like. Mrs. Thornton goes where she pleases. Eli said, and right now, she's recovering from a fall. Tom's eyes went to Clara's bandaged hands. Of course, maybe when she's feeling better. The missus, she gets lonely for female company. After he left, Clara sat in miserable silence. The judgment had found her after all. I should leave, she said quietly. I'm bringing shame to your house. Eli turned from the door, his face dark with anger. Not at her, she realized, but at the situation. This is your home as long as you want it. Let them talk. You don't understand. The things they'll say. I've been talked about before. Survived it fine. This is different. A man and woman. Not married. Living. You're under my protection. That's all anyone needs to know. Protection. The word should have made her feel safe. Instead, it reminded her of her vulnerability, her dependence on his goodwill. What happened when that protection was withdrawn? That night, she hobbled to her room despite his protests. Her ankle throbbed, but not as much as her heart. She'd let herself forget, for a few weeks, what she was, a woman with no standing, no rights, no future beyond what charity others might show. A soft knock interrupted her dark thoughts. Clara, brought you something for the pain. She opened the door to find Eli with a cup of willow bark tea. He'd remembered how she liked it, with a touch of honey. Thank you, she said, taking the cup. Their fingers brushed in the transfer. Clara, he began, then stopped. Started again. I meant what I said. This is your home. I don't give a damn what Tom Porter or anyone else thinks. But your reputation has survived worse. Drink your tea. She sipped obediently. He stood in her doorway, seeming to wrestle with words. I'm not a man who speaks easy, he finally said. But I need you to know. You've brought something back to this place, something I thought was gone for good. Don't let them take that away. Before she could respond, He was gone, his footsteps retreating to his own room. Clara sat on her bed, tea cooling in her hands, and felt something crack open in her chest. Not her heart, that had broken long ago, but maybe, just maybe, the shell she'd built around it. The next morning, despite her ankle, she was up before him. When he entered the kitchen, she had breakfast waiting, flapjacks with the last of the maple syrup, thick sliced bacon, coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. "You should be resting that foot," he said. "I've rested enough." She set a plate before him with quiet determination. "This is my job. Let me do it." He studied her for a long moment, then sat. They ate in companionable silence, but the very air seemed charged with unspoken words. That afternoon, while Eli worked, Clara sat on the porch with her mending. The view stretched endlessly, mountains rising like promises, sky so blue it hurt to look at. She was piecing together one of his torn shirts when movement caught her eye. A rider approaching, moving fast, her hands stilled on the fabric, even at a distance. She recognized the thick-set build, the aggressive posture. Josiah Thornton had found her. She stood, favoring her injured ankle, as he thundered into the yard. His face was red with drink and fury. "There you are, you ungrateful slattern." He dismounted clumsily, stomping toward the porch. "Thought you could just disappear, make us look like fools." "Josiah," she said, amazed at how steady her voice sounded. "You have no business here." "No business? You're my brother's widow. You belong to our family. I belong to no one." His hand shot out, grabbing her arm hard enough to bruise. "You'll come back with me now. Ma's got plans for you. There's a man from Butte willing to pay good money for a broken-in woman who won't give him no trouble." Terror and rage warred in Clara's chest. But before she could respond, a voice cut through the air like a blade. "Take your hand off her." Eli stood 10 feet away, rifle held loose but ready. Clara had never seen his face so cold, so dangerous. Josiah's grip loosened but didn't release. "This ain't your concern. Calhoun, this is family business. She's under my protection. That makes it my concern. Now take your hand off her before I remove it for you." Something in Eli's eyes must have convinced him. Josiah let go, stepping back. "You don't know what you're getting into. She's barren, worthless. Couldn't even give my brother a child." The lie hurt were spoken aloud. Clara felt tears threaten but refused to let them fall. "Get off my land," Eli said quietly. "Don't come back. This ain't over." Josiah snarled. "You can't just take what belongs to us." Eli's rifle shifted slightly. I did. Now get." Josiah backed toward his horse, still spitting threats. "You'll regret this, both of you. Ma's got influence in town. We'll make sure everyone knows what kind of woman you're keeping, what kind of man keeps her." He rode off in a cloud of dust and curses. Clara sank onto the porch step, shaking. Eli set his rifle aside and crouched before her. "Did he hurt you?" She shook her head, though her arm throbbed where Josiah had grabbed it. "I'm sorry. I've brought trouble to your door." "Look at me." When she did, his gray eyes were fierce with an emotion she couldn't name. "You've brought nothing but good to this place. They're the trouble, not you." His hand covered hers where it rested on her knee. This time, neither pulled away. "I can't give children," she whispered, the shame of it burning her throat. "What Josiah said is a damn lie meant to hurt you. I've got eyes. Clara, I can see who you are. You don't understand. I was with child when Samuel died, but after the shock and Martha's, I lost it. There was so much blood, and the doctor said..." She couldn't continue. Eli's hand tightened on hers. When he spoke, his voice was rough with suppressed emotion. "Mary died trying to give me a son. They both died. I know about loss. Clara, I know about blame, but I also know it wasn't your fault, any more than it was mine." They sat there as the sun sank toward the mountains, two broken souls holding fast to each other. Not healing yet. The wounds were still too raw, but maybe, for the first time, not bleeding alone. Winter arrived early that year, sweeping down from the mountains with a vengeance. The first storm caught them unprepared. Clara had been tending the chickens when the temperature plummeted and snow began falling in thick, heavy curtains. By the time she made it back to the house, she was soaked through and shivering violently. Eli took one look at her and steered her toward the fireplace. "Get out of those wet clothes," he ordered, already stoking the fire higher. "I'll heat water." She changed into dry things with numb fingers, her teeth chattering so hard she feared they might crack. When she emerged from her room, wrapped in every shawl she owned, Eli had water warming and blankets heating by the fire. "Sit," he commanded, pointing to the chair closest to the flames. "The chickens are fine. Sit." She sat. He wrapped the warmed blankets around her, then surprised her by kneeling to remove her boots and stockings. His hands were gentle as he checked her feet for signs of frostbite. "You need to be more careful," he said, rubbing warmth back into her toes. "Winter here isn't like in town. It'll kill you if you let it." The intimacy of the moment, his hands on her feet, the firelight playing across his concerned face, made her breath catch. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize." "Nothing to apologize for, just let me teach you what you need to know to survive here." That became their pattern through the brutal months that followed. He taught her to read the sky for weather signs, to bank the fires properly at night, to recognize the dangerous cold that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. She learned to layer clothing, to keep emergency supplies in the barn, to never venture far from shelter when clouds gathered. The blizzards, when they came, transformed their isolated world into something even smaller. Days would pass when Eli couldn't make it farther than the barn. They were trapped together in the small house, the wind howling like wolves around the eaves. At first, the enforced proximity was awkward. They were too aware of each other, too careful to maintain appropriate distance. But as the storms continued, formality gave way to necessity. They developed routines, Eli tending the fires and hauling wood, while Clara cooked meals that would stretch their dwindling supplies. Evenings spent playing cards or reading aloud while snow piled against the windows. One particularly vicious night, Clara woke to find her room so cold that frost had formed on the inside walls. Her breath came in visible puffs, and despite the pile of quilts, she couldn't stop shaking. A knock at her door. "Clara, you all right?" Cold," she managed through chattering teeth. He entered without waiting for permission, took one look at the frost-covered room, and made a decision. "Fire in here's no good. Too far from the chimney. Come on." "Where?" "Main room. We'll make a pallet by the big fireplace." She was too cold to argue about propriety. He helped her gather her blankets and led her to the main room, where the fire crackled invitingly. He'd already laid out a thick pile of blankets on the floor. "You take that side," he said, indicating the spot closest to the fire. "I'll sleep here." He pointed to a spot several feet away, close to the door. "You'll freeze there." "I'll be fine." But an hour later, she could hear his teeth chattering too. Pride warred with pragmatism and lost. "Eli," she whispered into the darkness. "This is foolish. We'll both freeze for the sake of propriety that no one's here to see." A long pause. Then, "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He moved closer, bringing his blankets. They arranged themselves carefully, back to back, sharing warmth but maintaining what distance they could. Clara felt the solid presence of him, heard his breathing slowly even out. Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, she felt safer than she had in years. She woke once in the night to find they'd shifted in sleep. Her back was pressed against his chest, his arm draped protectively over her waist. She should move away, should restore the proper distance between them. Instead, she closed her eyes and let herself have this moment of comfort, of not being alone against the cold. Morning brought embarrassment and careful politeness. Neither mentioned the night's arrangement, but when the next blizzard struck, Eli simply laid out the pallets by the fire without discussion. They slept that way through the worst of the winter, a practical arrangement. Nothing more, or so they told themselves. The crisis came in late January. Eli had gone to check the cattle in the far pasture despite Clara's worries about the gathering clouds. He'd been gone 2 hours when the storm hit with a fury that made the previous blizzards seem gentle. Clara paced the kitchen, peering out windows that showed nothing but white. He should have been back by now. The temperature was dropping fast, and the wind howled like a living thing. Another hour passed, then 2. The light was failing, and still no sign of him. She couldn't wait any longer. Clara dressed in every layer she could find, tied a rope around her waist, and secured the other end to the porch post, a trick Eli had taught her. She would not lose her way in the whiteout. The wind hit her like a physical blow, driving ice crystals into every exposed bit of skin. She could barely see 3 feet ahead, but she pressed on, following the fence line toward the barn. Maybe he'd taken shelter there. "Eli!" she screamed, but the wind tore the word away. She found him halfway between the barn and the house, collapsed in the snow. His horse was gone, spooked by something, probably. He was conscious, but barely, his lips blue with cold. "Can you stand?" She had to yell directly into his ear. He tried, but stumbled. There was blood on his temple. He'd hit his head when he fell. Clara got her shoulder under his arm, taking as much of his weight as she could, step by agonizing step. She half-dragged him through the snow, following the rope back to safety. They crashed through the door in a tangle of limbs and snow. Clara kicked it shut and immediately began stripping his wet outer clothes. His skin was like ice, his responses sluggish. "Stay awake," she ordered, slapping his cheeks when his eyes began to close. "Eli, you stay with me." She got him to the fireplace, piling on blankets, but he couldn't stop shaking. She knew what had to be done, had seen it once when Samuel's unit had dealt with men caught in a blizzard. Body heat was the fastest way to warm someone dangerously cold. Without giving herself time to think, she stripped to her chemise and crawled under the blankets with him, pressing every inch of herself against his frozen form. He made a sound of protest. "Hush," she said fiercely. "I won't lose you too." She held him as he shook, rubbing his arms and back, willing her warmth into him. Gradually, terribly slowly, the shaking eased. His skin began to lose its deathly chill. His breathing deepened. "Clara," he whispered. "I'm here." His arms came around her, whether from cold or something else. She didn't know. They lay entwined while the storm raged outside, and Clara found herself crying, for the fear of almost losing him, for the intimacy of this moment, for the feelings she could no longer deny. When she pulled back to look at him, his gray eyes were fully aware, watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You came for me," he said wonderingly. "Of course I did." His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear. "Clara, She kissed him. It was nothing like the chaste pecks she'd shared with Samuel in their courtship. This was desperate and deep, tasting of need and loneliness, and something fierce that had been building between them for months. Eli made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her hair. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, reality crashed back. Clara tried to pull away, but Eli held her fast. "Don't," he said roughly. "Don't run from this. I shouldn't have. Do you regret it?" She met his eyes, saw her own vulnerability reflected there. "No, neither do I." His hand stroked her hair, gentling her like a spooked horse. "I've wanted to do that since the day you laughed in the mud. Despite everything?" She smiled at that. "Truly? Truly?" His expression grew serious. "Clara, I'm not a man of pretty words. I'm set in my ways. Work too hard, talk too little, but He stopped, struggling. "You've become everything. I wake up looking forward to your smile. Go to sleep thinking about your voice. I don't know when it happened, but somewhere between the garden and the storms, you became my whole world." Clara's tears came freely now. "I'm damaged. Eli, used up. I can't give you children. Can't give you—" "I don't want children. I want you." His voice was fierce with conviction. "Just you. exactly as you are." She kissed him again, pouring all her fear and hope and growing love into it. He responded with equal fervor, and soon the heat between them had nothing to do with warming cold skin. His hands skimmed her sides through the thin chemise, making her gasp. She'd been touched with lust before, with casual ownership, with cruel indifference. But this reverent exploration, as if she were something precious and breakable, this was entirely new. "Clara," he breathed against her throat. "Tell me to stop." "Don't stop," she whispered back. "Please don't stop." What followed was a revelation. Where her wedding night had been awkward and brief, and her marriage bed often perfunctory, this was something else entirely. Eli touched her like a man worshipping at an altar, drawing sounds from her she didn't know she could make. When they joined, it was with a rightness that made her cry out, clutching his shoulders as he moved above her. After, they lay tangled together, skin cooling in the firelight. Clara traced the scars on his chest, from horses, from work, from life lived hard. He pressed kisses to her hair, her forehead, her closed eyelids. "Stay with me," he said quietly. "Not just for the winter, not just until something better comes along. Stay." "Yes," she whispered against his chest. "Yes." Outside, the storm finally began to die, but inside, by the fire, a different kind of warmth had taken root, one that would outlast any winter. Spring came slowly to the mountains, melting snow revealing the earth in patches like a quilt coming apart at the seams. Clara stood on the porch, breathing in air that finally held warmth instead of teeth. She wore one of Eli's shirts over her dress, practical for work, but also a quiet claim that made her smile whenever she caught his eye. They hadn't spoken of marriage yet, though they shared a bed now and moved around each other with the easy intimacy of long-wedded couples. The words would come. She knew. Eli did nothing hastily, and she found she didn't mind the wait. After the desperate rush of her first marriage, this slow, steady building of a life together felt like luxury. She was feeding the chickens when she heard the horses, multiple riders, moving fast. Her blood chilled. Nothing good came from groups of men riding hard toward isolated ranches. "Eli!" she called, but he was in the far pasture. She ran for the house, for the rifle he'd taught her to shoot over the winter. Her hands were steady as she loaded it, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Through the window, she could see them now, 5 riders, led by a man she recognized with sinking dread. Carl Morrison, the biggest landowner in 3 counties, the man who'd been trying to buy Eli's water rights for years. Clara stepped onto the porch, rifle held crossways, visible but not directly threatening. Yet, "Mr. Morrison," she said as they reined up in the yard. "Eli's not here." Morrison's eyes traveled over her, taking in the men's shirt, the proprietary way she stood on the porch. His smile was thin and mean. "Mrs. Thornton, heard you'd taken up residence here, though residence might be too polite a term." The men with him snickered. Clara's finger found the trigger guard. "State your business or move on." "Feisty. I can see why Calhoun keeps you around." Morrison leaned forward in his saddle. "I'm here with an offer. A good one. Tell Calhoun I'll buy him out for twice what this place is worth. Cash money." "He's not selling." "You don't speak for him, woman." "I speak for this house when he's not here, and I'm telling you he's not selling. Not for twice the value, not for 10 times. Morrison's face darkened. "You might want to reconsider. Things can get difficult. For folks who don't see reason. Stock goes missing, fences get cut, wells go bad." "Is that a threat, Mr. Morrison?" "Just being neighborly. Wouldn't want anything to happen to you folks out here all alone." The sound of a rifle cocking behind her made everyone freeze. Tom Porter stepped out from the side of the house, his weapon trained on Morrison. "Afternoon, Carl," Tom said pleasantly. "Couldn't help but overhear. Sounds like you're threatening my neighbors." Morrison's jaw worked. "This isn't your concern, Porter. See, that's where you're wrong. Eli helped me out 2 winters back when I broke my leg. Man saves your life. You owe him. So yeah, his concerns are mine." 2 more riders appeared from the direction of the road, the Hendricks brothers from the ranch to the south. They took in the scene and wordlessly flanked Tom. "Looks like a party," the elder Hendricks said. "We invited?" Morrison looked at his surrounded men, at the armed woman on the porch, at the gathering neighbors. "This isn't over." He snarled. "Yes, it is." Clara said quietly, "Come here again, and I'll shoot you myself. That's not a threat. Mr. Morrison, that's a promise." He wheeled his horse around and spurred it viciously. His men followed, dust rising in their wake. Tom lowered his rifle, grinning at Clara. "Remind me never to get on your bad side, ma'am." "How did you know to come?" "Saw them riding hard this direction. Figured it might mean trouble. Stopped by the Hendricks place on the way." He tipped his hat. "You did good. But Morrison's right about one thing. This isn't over. Men like him don't give up easy." By the time Eli returned, the neighbors had gone. But Clara could see the tension in his shoulders as she related the events. His face went dark as thunder when she described Morrison's threats. "I should have been here," he said. "I handled it. You shouldn't have had to." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough to hurt. "If something had happened to you..." "Nothing happened. The neighbors came. We're not as alone as Morrison thinks." But that night, Eli loaded extra ammunition and placed guns in strategic spots around the house. Clara didn't protest. She knew Morrison's type, men who saw the world as something to be owned, who couldn't bear being told no by anyone, especially a woman. The first trouble came a week later. They woke to find dead cattle, 3 head, shot and left to rot near the creek that marked the property line. Eli's face was stone as he surveyed the damage. "Could be wolves," Clara suggested, though they both knew better. "Wolves don't use rifles." They burned the carcasses and said nothing more about it. But Eli started riding armed, and Clara kept the rifle within reach even when hanging laundry. The second incident was worse. Clara had gone to town for supplies, a monthly trip she'd finally felt brave enough to make alone. The general store fell silent when she entered. Mrs. Paulson, who'd always been coldly civil, turned her back completely. "I need flour," Clara said to Mr. Paulson, "and salt. Coffee if you have it." "Don't have none," he said, not meeting her eye. Clara looked at the full shelves behind him. "I can see the flour from here. Not for sale." "Mr. Paulson, you heard me? Not for sale. Not to you." Understanding dawned cold and bitter. Morrison had gotten to them. Money talked in a small town, and Morrison had plenty. "I see," Clara said quietly. "And if I brought Eli? Calhoun's credit's no good here either. You want supplies? Maybe try the next county." Clara left with her head high, but inside she shook with rage and fear. The next county was 2 days' ride. Without supplies, they couldn't last. She was halfway home when riders surrounded her wagon. Not Morrison's men, but townsmen she recognized. Among them, horrifyingly, was Josiah Thornton. Well, Josiah said. "The Scarlet Woman herself. Heard you've been causing trouble in town. Let me pass." "Josiah? Or what? You'll get your keeper to protect you? He's not here now." One of the men grabbed her horse's bridle. Clara reached for the rifle under the wagon seat, but Josiah was faster, yanking it away. Now, no need for that. We're just here to deliver a message, which is, Morrison's offer stands. Take it and leave, or things get worse, a lot worse. And if we don't," Josiah's smile was ugly, "then maybe folks remember that harboring a woman of low morals is a crime in this county. Maybe the sheriff takes an interest. Maybe Calhoun finds himself in jail while you... Well, there's places for women like you." Clara's hands clenched on the reins. "I'm not afraid of you." "You should be." He leaned closer, breath foul with whiskey. "You cost me good boots. Woman. But Morrison's paying better than boots for anyone who helps convince Calhoun to sell. Get away from my wife." The voice cracked like a whip. Eli sat his horse at the edge of the road, rifle already aimed at Josiah's chest. Behind him rode Tom Porter and the Hendricks brothers, all armed. "Wife," Josiah sputtered. "You ain't married. As of yesterday. We are." Eli's voice was steady as his aim. "Judge in the next county was happy to oblige. Now step away from her." Clara's heart leaped. Married. He'd gone and done it without her. The wonderful, stubborn man. The townsmen scattered like quail, leaving Josiah alone with his bravado rapidly failing. "This doesn't change anything," he said. "Morrison gets what he wants." "Morrison can go to hell, and so can you if you ever come near my wife again." Eli cocked the rifle. "Git." Josiah got, after the others left with promises to spread the word about the marriage. Eli helped Clara down from the wagon. She fell into his arms, shaking with delayed reaction. "You married me without me?" she asked against his chest. Seemed the practical thing, meant to ask proper, but then this happened. He pulled back to look at her. "Are you angry?" "Furious," she said, then kissed him soundly. "Also deliriously happy." "Good, because I may have also filed on that parcel to the south, the one with the extra water. Figured if Morrison wants a fight, we'd best be ready." Clara laughed, surprising them both. "Eli Calhoun, you romantic fool." "Nothing romantic about water rights," he protested, but his eyes were warm. That night, they made love with an edge of desperation, clinging to each other as the world outside grew more hostile. But in the morning, Clara woke to find Eli watching her with such tenderness it took her breath. "What?" she asked. "Just thinking about how I used to wake up alone, counting the things that needed doing. Now I wake up counting the ways I love you." She traced his jaw with wondering fingers. "How many ways?" "Haven't found the end of them yet." Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, but inside their small house, for this moment, there was only warmth and love and the quiet certainty that whatever came, they would face it together. The real storm was coming. Morrison wouldn't give up, and the town had turned against them. But Clara had learned something that winter, something more valuable than any lesson about weather or survival. Sometimes the things that seemed like endings were really beginnings, and sometimes a pair of boots could buy you everything that mattered in the world. Spring unfurled across the valley like a green promise. Clara's garden burst to life with a vengeance, as if the earth itself was making up for the hard winter. She worked the soil with newfound energy. Her wedding band, a simple gold band Eli had somehow procured, catching the sunlight as she planted row after row of vegetables. The intimidation from Morrison had subsided to an uneasy quiet. No more dead cattle, no more threats. But Clara knew better than to trust the silence. Men like Morrison didn't give up. They just changed tactics. She was right to worry. The fire started on a hot afternoon in late May. Clara was in the house, kneading bread, when she smelled smoke. Not the clean smoke of a cook fire, but the acrid stink of burning hay. "Fire!" she screamed, racing outside. The barn was ablaze, flames already licking through the roof. The horses were screaming, trapped inside. Clara didn't think. She grabbed a bucket, filled it at the trough, and ran toward the inferno. The heat hit her like a wall, but she could hear Buttercup lowing in terror, could hear the horses' panicked whinnies. She yanked open the barn door, smoke billowing out in a black cloud. The horses burst past her, nearly knocking her down in their terror. Buttercup was deeper inside, her rope tangled. Clara dropped to her knees, crawling under the smoke. Her eyes streamed, her lungs burned. But she found the cow and cut the rope with her kitchen knife. "Go!" she screamed, slapping Buttercup's flank. The cow lumbered out, and Clara followed, coughing and retching. She was filling another bucket when Eli arrived, his face white with fear. "Clara, the hay!" she gasped. "It's all going up." They fought the fire together, joined soon by Tom Porter and his sons, the Hendricks brothers, even gruff old Walter Pike from 10 miles north. A bucket brigade formed, men and women working with desperate efficiency. But it was too late for the barn. They focused on keeping it from spreading to the house. By sunset, the barn was a smoking ruin. Clara sat on the porch steps, her dress singed, her hands blistered, watching their neighbors sift through the ashes. A year's worth of hay. Gone. Their tools. Destroyed. The loss was devastating. "Found something," Tom called. He held up a can, kerosene, with Morrison's brand burned into the side. Eli's face went deadly still. "He's going to burn us out." "Can't prove it was him," Walter Pike said, though his expression said he had no doubts. "Can says Morrison, but anyone could have gotten hold of it." "Doesn't matter," Tom said. "We all know who did this." That night, as Clara treated Eli's burns with salve, he was quiet in a way that frightened her. She knew that look, the same one Samuel had worn before battle. "Don't," she said softly. "Don't what?" "Whatever you're planning, don't." He caught her hand. "He tried to kill you. Clara, you could have died in that fire." "But I didn't. This time?" His jaw clenched. "What about next time? What happens when he decides burning the barn isn't enough?" She had no answer for that. They rebuilt. What choice did they have? The neighbors came again, bringing lumber and nails and precious time. In 2 weeks, a new barn stood where the old one had been, smaller but solid. Tom Porter's wife brought laying hens to replace the ones lost in the fire. The Hendricks donated hay from their own stores. "Why?" Clara asked Mrs. Porter as they shared coffee on the porch. "Why help us? You barely know us." The older woman smiled. "Because that's what we do out here. And because—" She hesitated, then continued, "because it's good to see Eli happy again. That man was half dead inside before you came. Now he's alive. That's worth protecting." The words warmed Clara more than the coffee. But Morrison wasn't done. The next attack was more personal. Clara had finally managed to trade eggs for flour with a farmer in the next valley when she found the letter nailed to their door. Eli was still out with the cattle, so she read it alone. "To whom it may concern, it has come to our attention that Eli Calhoun is harboring a woman of questionable morals, Mrs. Clara Thornton abandoned her late husband's family, refusing to honor her obligations. She is known to have seduced Mr. Calhoun for her own gain. Such behavior cannot be tolerated in a Christian community unless Mr. Calhoun sees fit to send this woman away and accept Mr. Morrison's generous offer for his land. We will be forced to take legal action. The sheriff has been notified of the situation. Concerned citizens of Cedar Ridge." Clara's hands shook as she read, not from fear, but from rage. They were attacking her reputation to get to Eli, using her past as a weapon. She was still standing there when riders appeared on the road. Her heart sank as she recognized Sheriff Dale, a man deep in Morrison's pocket. With him rode 2 deputies and, horribly, Martha Thornton. "Mrs. Calhoun," the sheriff said, tipping his hat with false courtesy. "Or is it still Mrs. Thornton? The records are a bit confused." "It's Calhoun," Clara said steadily. "As you well know." "Well now, that's the thing. Mrs. Thornton here says her son never properly divorced you. Says that makes your marriage to Calhoun invalid. Bigamy's a serious crime in this territory." Martha's smile was venomous. "Hello, Clara dear. You didn't think you could just run off and play house forever, did you? Samuel is dead," Clara said. "That makes me a widow, free to remarry." "But can you prove he's dead?" the sheriff asked. "Do you have papers? A death certificate?" Mrs. Thornton says she never received official word. It was a lie, of course. They'd gotten the letter from Samuel's commanding officer, had held the memorial service. But Clara realized with sinking heart that Martha had destroyed any proof. "This is ridiculous," she said. "Maybe so," the sheriff agreed. "But until we can sort it out, I'm afraid you'll need to come with me, just until the judge can review the case." "You're arresting me?" "Protective custody. For your own good." Clara laughed bitterly. "In Morrison's jail? How protective?" That's when Eli arrived. He took in the scene, the sheriff, the deputies with hands on their guns, Martha's triumphant face, Clara's rigid stance, and his expression went colder than winter stone. "Sheriff," he said calmly, "get off my land. Now, Calhoun, no need for trouble. We're just here to harass my wife on Morrison's orders." Eli dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Turn around and ride out. Now." "Can't do that. Got a complaint to investigate." "From a bitter woman who beat Clara when she was defenseless." "That's your witness?" Martha sputtered. "How dare you?" I was there," Tom Porter said, riding up with several other neighbors. Word traveled fast in the valley. "Saw the bruises myself. Saw how you treated her." "Me too," said Mrs. Hendricks. "Saw you slap her in the general store once. Called her barren and useless." More neighbors appeared, forming a protective semicircle around Clara and Eli. The sheriff looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Now, folks, let's not get excited," he said. "Too late." Walter Pike growled. "We're already excited. Excited about carpetbaggers like Morrison thinking they can buy and burn their way to whatever they want. Excited about lawmen who forget who pays their salary. The county pays my salary," the sheriff said weakly. "We are the county," Tom said. "And we say you're done here." The sheriff looked at the growing crowd, at the determination in their faces, and made a practical decision. "This ain't over," he told Eli. "Morrison's got lawyers. He'll make it legal next time." "Let him try." After they left, Clara found herself surrounded by neighbors, all talking at once. Plans were made, strategies discussed, but all she could see was Eli's face, the weight he carried trying to protect her. That night, as they lay in bed, she said, "Maybe I should go." His arm tightened around her. "Don't." "If I left, Morrison would leave you alone. You could keep the ranch, live in peace." He rolled to face her, cupping her face in his hands. "Woman, do you think this ranch means a damn thing without you in it? Do you think I care about peace if it means being alone again? But, no, we stand together or not at all. That's what marriage means." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and fear and determination into it. When they made love, it was with a fierce tenderness, each touch an affirmation, each whispered word a promise. Later, as Eli slept, Clara stared at the ceiling and made her own plans. Morrison had made this personal, attacking her to get to Eli. Well, two could play that game. The next morning, she put on her best dress, the blue one Eli had bought her for their wedding, and asked Tom Porter for a ride to town. "Clara," Tom said uneasily, "I don't think Eli would want." "Eli's not here," she said firmly, "and I have business in town." She found Morrison in his office above the bank, surrounded by the trappings of his power. He looked up in surprise when she entered. "Mrs. Calhoun, how unexpected." "We need to talk," Clara said, closing the door behind her. "I don't think—" "Shut up and listen." Her voice cracked like a whip. Morrison actually sat back. "You want the water rights. I understand that. Business is business. But you made it personal when you brought Martha into it. When you tried to shame me. I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Clara stepped closer, her green eyes blazing. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop. No more fires, no more threats, no more using the law as a weapon. You're going to leave us in peace." Morrison laughed. "Or what? You'll shoot me? Have your husband call me out?" "No." Clara smiled, and something in it made Morrison's laughter die. "I'll tell your wife about Annie Sullivan." Morrison went white. "You don't know anything about the girl from Denver, the one you set up in that house on Creek Street, the one who had a baby 9 months after you visited?" Clara had done her research, trading eggs for gossip with the working women who knew all the town's secrets. "Your wife's a proud woman, Mr. Morrison, from an old family back east. How do you think she'd take the news? How would her father's lawyers—" "You're bluffing." Clara pulled out a letter. "From Annie herself. Seems she's tired of waiting for promises to be kept, willing to tell her story to anyone who'll listen, including your wife." Morrison's face went from white to red to purple. "That's blackmail." "Yes," Clara agreed pleasantly. "It is, just like what you tried to do to us." She set the letter on his desk. "That's a copy. I have the original. touch my husband, our ranch, or me again, and your wife gets it, along with half the territory. You little—" "Careful," Clara warned. "I'm a desperate woman, Mr. Morrison. I've been sold for boots, beaten, shamed, and driven from my home. I've got nothing left to lose except the man I love. That makes me dangerous." She turned to go, then looked back. "Oh, and Mr. Morrison, we'll be buying supplies in town from now on. I trust there won't be any problems with that." Morrison's jaw worked soundlessly. "Finally," he nodded. Clara left with her head high. By the time she got home, Eli was waiting on the porch, Tom Porter having ridden ahead to warn him. "Woman," he said as she climbed down from the wagon. "What did you do?" She told him. His expression went from angry to shocked to something that might have been awe. "You blackmailed Carl Morrison? I protected what's mine," she said simply, "the way you protected me." He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "God, Clara, you magnificent, terrifying woman. Are you angry?" He pulled back to look at her, and she was startled to see tears in his eyes. "I'm so proud I could burst, and scared, and how did I get so lucky?" "It wasn't luck," Clara said, thinking of that day in the market, of boots and choices and the strange turns of fate. "It was a trade, the best one ever made." That night, for the first time in weeks, they slept peacefully. Morrison would stew and rage, but he wouldn't act, not with Annie Sullivan's letter hanging over him like a sword. The ranch was safe. They were together. And in this hard land where happiness was earned in sweat and tears, that was everything. The uneasy peace lasted through summer and into early fall. Morrison kept his distance, though Clara sometimes saw his men watching from the ridgelines. The threat hung over them like smoke. But for now, they were free to live, and live they did. Clara's garden flourished beyond all expectation, producing enough vegetables to trade for what they couldn't grow. Eli bought 2 more cows and talked of maybe trying sheep in the spring. They worked side by side through the long days, falling into bed exhausted but content. It was on one such evening, as Clara served supper, that the world tilted on its axis again. She'd been feeling poorly for days, tired, queasy in the mornings. She'd attributed it to the heat and hard work, but as she set Eli's plate before him, a wave of dizziness made her grip the table. "Clara." Eli was on his feet immediately, supporting her. "What's wrong?" "I'm fine, just tired." But even as she said it, a possibility bloomed in her mind. Her monthly courses, usually regular as clockwork, hadn't come in. "How long?" "You're pale as paper. Sit down." She sat, mind racing. It wasn't possible. The doctor had said, after the miscarriage, that there was damage. The children were unlikely. She'd accepted that barrenness as part of her burden, part of what made her worthless in the world's eyes. But now, "I think," she said slowly, "I might need to see Mrs. Henderson." Mrs. Henderson served as midwife for the valley, having delivered most of the babies in 3 counties. Eli's face went through several expressions before settling on cautious hope. "You think?" "I don't know. Maybe, but the doctor said—" "Doctors can be wrong." His hand covered hers, trembling slightly. "When can we go?" They went the next morning. Mrs. Henderson, a capable woman with gentle hands and sharp eyes, examined Clara thoroughly while Eli paced outside like a caged wolf. "Well," the midwife said finally, "I'd say you're about 3 months along, maybe a little more." Clara's knees went weak. "But the doctor said I couldn't—" "Doctors say a lot of things. The body has its own wisdom." Mrs. Henderson patted her hand. "You're healthy. The baby seems fine. Just take care of yourself. No heavy lifting. Plenty of rest." Clara emerged from the house in a daze. Eli took one look at her face and pulled her into his arms. "It's true," he whispered. She nodded against his chest, tears streaming. "April, she thinks the baby will come in April." He held her tighter, and she felt him shaking. When he pulled back, his face was wet too. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby." The ride home was quiet, both of them struggling to absorb this miracle. Clara kept touching her still flat stomach, hardly daring to believe. After so much loss, could she trust this joy? They decided to keep the news quiet for now. Too many things could go wrong in the early months, and Clara couldn't bear the thought of public pity if she lost this child too. But Eli treated her like spun glass, taking on her heavier chores, watching her with a mixture of awe and terror. "I'm not going to break," she told him one morning as he tried to carry the egg basket for her. "Let me fuss," he said. "I've got 8 months of fussing to fit in." The weeks passed in a golden haze. Clara's morning sickness was mild, and once it passed, she felt better than she had in years. Her body, so long a source of shame and failure, was doing this miraculous thing, creating life where the doctor had said none could grow. It was in her 4th month, when her belly had begun to round noticeably under her aprons, that Josiah returned. Clara was alone, hanging laundry, when she heard the horse. She turned, expecting Eli back early from town, and froze. Josiah sat his mount at the edge of the yard, but he wasn't alone. Behind him rode a man Clara didn't recognize, well-dressed, with a soft look of someone who worked with papers, not land. "Clara," Josiah said, dismounting. "You're looking, well—" Her hand went instinctively to her stomach. "What do you want?" "This here's Mr. Hartwell. He's a lawyer from Denver. Has some interesting papers regarding your first marriage." The lawyer dismounted, pulling documents from his saddlebag. "Mrs. Thornton, or should I say, Miss Wells, it seems there are questions about the validity of your marriage to Samuel Thornton." Clara's blood went cold. "What are you talking about? According to our research, you were only 16 when you married Mr. Thornton. In this territory, a woman under 18 needs parental consent to marry. Do you have proof of such consent? My parents were dead. I was living with my aunt, who wasn't your legal guardian. Without proper consent, your marriage was invalid, which means you were never legally Mrs. Thornton, which means your claim to widowhood is false, as is your current marriage." Clara saw the trap now. If she'd never been legally married to Samuel, she had no claim to being his widow. But more importantly, if her marriage to Eli was invalid. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. Josiah smiled. "Morrison's being generous. Sign over any claim to this land, leave quietly, and we'll forget the whole thing. Otherwise, we'll have your marriage to Calhoun annulled. Any children will be declared illegitimate." His eyes dropped to her rounded belly, and his smile widened. "Would be a shame for a child to start life with that kind of stain." "Get out," Clara said. "Think about it," the lawyer said, setting the papers on the porch step. "You have 1 week to decide. After that, we file with the court." They rode away, leaving Clara standing in the yard, one hand pressed to her stomach where the baby had just begun to move. Illegitimate. The word echoed in her mind like a curse. When Eli returned, he found her sitting at the kitchen table, the legal papers spread before her. His face darkened as he read. "It's lies," he said flatly. "But what if it's not? What if they're right about the consent? I was only 16, and Aunt Ruth wasn't my legal guardian. She was just the person who took me in. It doesn't matter." "Of course it matters." Clara's voice broke. Our child will be loved and protected no matter what papers say." Eli knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. "Clara, look at me." She met his gray eyes, saw the fierce determination there. "We'll fight this," he said. "Get our own lawyer. Tom Porter knows a man in the Capitol, honest as they come. We'll prove your marriage to Samuel was valid. And if we can't, then we'll marry again, and again after that if need be. I'll marry you in every church in the territory if that's what it takes." Despite everything, Clara smiled. "That's a lot of ceremonies. Worth it." His hand covered her belly gently. "Both of you are worth it." But the threat gnawed at Clara. She'd lived through shame before, survived being the widow traded for boots. But the thought of her child bearing that stigma, growing up, whispered about Marked as illegitimate, it was unbearable. She made a decision. The next morning, while Eli was with the cattle, Clara saddled the gentlest mare and rode to town, not to Morrison's office, but to the church. Reverend Masters was new to Cedar Ridge, young and idealistic and not yet under Morrison's thumb. He listened to Clara's story with growing indignation. "This is persecution," he said when she finished. "Using the law as a weapon against the innocent. Can you help?" He thought for a long moment. "I might. Give me 2 days." Clara rode home, hope warring with fear. She didn't tell Eli about the visit. Couldn't bear to raise his hopes, only to dash them. 2 days later, Reverend Masters appeared at their door, but he wasn't alone. With him rode an elderly woman Clara didn't recognize, dressed in travel-worn but quality clothes. "Mrs. Calhoun," the Reverend said. "I'd like you to meet Mrs. Margaret Wells, your father's sister." Clara's knees nearly buckled. "My father didn't have a sister," he acknowledged. The woman said crisply, "We had a falling out years before you were born, but I've kept track of the family. I know who you are. Clara Elizabeth Wells." "I don't understand," Clara said. Margaret Wells smiled. "It's simple. My dear, your parents may be gone, but you do have legal family. Family who can retroactively provide consent for your marriage to Samuel Thornton. Family who can testify to your identity and validate your current marriage. You do that? For me? You don't even know me." "I know enough." Margaret's eyes were kind. "I know my brother would be proud of the woman you've become. I know you've faced trials that would break most people. And I know that baby you're carrying deserves to enter this world without the burden of others' greed and malice." Clara began to cry. Eli's arm came around her, steady and strong. "Thank you," he said simply. "Don't thank me yet." Margaret said, "We still have to face them in court, but I've brought documents, birth records, family papers, and I've stopped in Denver to file my own papers asserting guardianship retroactively. Morrison's lawyers will have a fight on their hands." The hearing was set for the following week. Word spread through the valley like wildfire. On the appointed day, the small courthouse was packed. Morrison sat in the front row, confident. Martha Thornton beside him, smug. Josiah looked less certain, perhaps remembering Clara's earlier threat about Annie Sullivan. The territorial judge, brought in from the capital to ensure fairness, was a stern man who brooked no nonsense. He listened to the lawyers' arguments, examined the papers, then called Margaret Wells to testify. She was magnificent. In clear, ringing tones, she established her identity, her relationship to Clara, and her full support of both marriages. She produced documents Clara hadn't even known existed, letters between her parents discussing the match with Samuel, proof of their approval. "And if there was any doubt," Margaret concluded, "I hereby give my full consent, retroactively and currently, to both unions. Clara is my niece, my blood, and I'll challenge anyone who says otherwise." The judge nodded. "Mr. Hartwell, do you have any evidence to refute Mrs. Wells's claims?" The lawyer looked at Morrison, then shook his head. "No, Your Honor." "Then I find the marriage is valid, both the original and the current. Case dismissed." The courthouse erupted. Clara sagged against Eli, relief making her weak. Margaret embraced them both. "Now then," she said briskly, "I believe you're expecting a child? I'll be staying until it arrives. No arguments. It's been too long since this family had a proper gathering." Morrison stormed out, followed by the Thorntons. Josiah paused at the door, looking back at Clara. For a moment, she saw what he might have been, just a man twisted by greed and bitterness. Then he was gone, and she felt nothing but relief. That night, as they celebrated with neighbors who'd become family, Clara felt the baby move strongly within her, a life untainted by the shame others had tried to force upon it, a child who would know only love. "Are you happy?" Eli asked quietly, his hand covering hers. Clara looked around the room, at Tom Porter laughing with his wife, at the Hendricks brothers attempting to dance, at Margaret teaching Mrs. Henderson a card game, their home, once empty and silent, filled with joy and laughter. Yes, she said, meaning it down to her bones. I'm happy. The baby kicked as if in agreement, and Clara smiled. April couldn't come soon enough. Spring came early that year, melting the mountain snows and turning the valley into a carpet of wildflowers. Clara stood on the porch, one hand supporting her heavy belly, watching Eli work with a new colt in the corral. At 8 months pregnant, she moved carefully, but her heart felt light as the meadowlark singing in the cottonwoods. Margaret had indeed stayed, transforming the spare bedroom into her own domain and filling the house with stories of Clara's father as a young man. Having family again, after so many years alone, was a gift Clara hadn't expected. You should be resting, Margaret said, joining her on the porch with a cup of tea. I've rested enough. Besides, the baby's restless today. Wants to see the world, I think. As if in response, the child kicked hard enough to make Clara gasp. Margaret smiled. Strong, like its mother. And stubborn, like its father, Clara added, watching Eli's patient work with the skittish colt. They'd received word the week before that Morrison had sold his holdings and moved back east. The official story was that his wife's health required it. Clara suspected Annie Sullivan's letter had played a part, but she felt no satisfaction in it, just relief that the threat was gone. That evening, as they sat down to supper, Clara felt the first pain, just a twinge, easily dismissed. But as the night wore on, the pains came stronger and closer together. It's time, Margaret said calmly when Clara finally admitted what was happening. Eli, ride for Mrs. Henderson, quickly now. Eli's face went white, but he moved with purpose, saddling his fastest horse. Before he left, he knelt beside Clara's chair, pressing his forehead to her hand. Be strong, he whispered. Always am, she managed, breathing through another contraction. The night stretched long and painful. Mrs. Henderson arrived with the dawn, taking charge with the efficiency of long practice. Margaret boiled water and tore sheets while Eli paced the porch like a caged mountain cat, flinching at every cry from inside. First babies take their time, Tom Porter said. He'd arrived with his wife, who was inside helping. My eldest took near 20 hours coming into the world. 20 hours. Eli looked sick. Clara's strong, Tom assured him. Strongest woman I know, besides my missus. But as morning became afternoon and afternoon stretched toward evening, even Tom looked worried. The sounds from inside had changed, becoming more desperate. Finally, Mrs. Henderson emerged, her face grave. Mr. Calhoun, you should come in. Eli's legs nearly gave out. Is she... She's asking for you. The baby's turned wrong. I can fix it, but it'll be hard on her. She needs you. Eli had never moved faster in his life. He found Clara pale and exhausted, hair plastered to her head with sweat. But her eyes, when they found his, were fierce with determination. Hey, she whispered. Hey yourself. He took her hand, alarmed at how cold it was. Giving us trouble already? Must take after you. She tried to smile, but another contraction stole her breath. Mrs. Henderson worked with grim efficiency while Margaret wiped Clara's face with cool cloths. I'm scared, Clara admitted when she could speak again. I know, I am too. Eli smoothed her hair back. But you're the bravest person I know. You faced down Morrison. You survived the Thorntons. You tamed me. This baby doesn't stand a chance against you. What if I can't? You can. You will. He leaned close, voice fierce with love. Because I need you. This baby needs you. We're not whole without you, Clara. So you fight. You hear me? She nodded, fresh tears mingling with sweat. Don't leave me. Never. The next hour was the longest of Eli's life. Clara fought with everything she had while he held her hand and whispered encouragement. Prayers, promises, anything to keep her anchored to him. Mrs. Henderson worked with bloody hands. Margaret prayed in the corner, and outside the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Then, just as the sky painted itself pink and gold, a new sound filled the room, a baby's cry, strong and indignant. It's a girl, Mrs., Henderson announced, lifting the squalling infant. "Perfect and healthy." Clara sobbed with relief and exhaustion as the baby was placed on her chest. Tiny fists waved in the air, and the cries gentled to soft, mewling sounds. "A girl," Eli breathed, one finger touching the impossibly small hand. The baby grasped it immediately, holding tight. "Look at her! Clara, look what you did!" "What we did," Clara corrected, smiling through her tears. They named her Sarah Margaret Calhoun. Sarah for new beginnings, Margaret for the aunt who'd given them validity when they needed it most. She had Clara's green eyes and what promised to be Eli's stubborn chin. And she was perfect. The house filled with neighbors over the following days, everyone wanting to meet the newest resident of the valley. Gifts appeared on the porch, blankets knitted by ranch wives, a cradle carved by Tom Porter, tiny clothes sewn with love. The community that had rallied to protect them now celebrated with them. "From traded for boots to this," Clara murmured one evening, nursing Sarah while Eli sat beside them, unable to stop touching them both as if to assure himself they were real. "Who would have thought?" "I would have," Margaret said from her chair by the fire. "The moment I heard what you'd survived, I knew you were meant for more than sorrow." Clara looked down at her daughter, then up at her husband. The journey had been hard, brutal at times. She'd been stripped of everything, reduced to a transaction, a thing to be bartered, but from that lowest point, she'd found strength she didn't know she had, found love that transcended circumstance, found family in unexpected places. "Do you ever think about them?" Eli asked quietly. "The Thorntons." "Sometimes," Clara admitted. "I hope they find peace. Holding on to all that bitterness, it's its own prison. You're more generous than I am." "No, I just refuse to let them take up any more space in our life." She shifted Sarah to her shoulder, patting the tiny back. "We have too much good to make room for their poison." A month later, on a perfect spring morning, Reverend Masters came to perform a blessing for Sarah. The entire valley seemed to turn out, filling the yard with laughter and congratulations. Clara stood with her daughter in her arms, watching Eli talk with the other ranchers about plans for the coming season, and felt a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. "Happy tears, I hope," Margaret said, appearing at her elbow. "The happiest," Clara assured her. "I was just thinking, 1.5 years ago, I thought my life was over. I was worth less than a pair of boots, with nothing ahead but servitude and shame. And now," Clara looked at her daughter's sleeping face, at her husband's strong profile, at the neighbors who'd become family, at the land that had become home. "Now I know I was wrong. My life wasn't ending. It was waiting to begin. I just had to be brave enough to take the first step into the unknown." Margaret agreed. The best journeys usually start that way. Later that night, after the guests had gone and Sarah slept in her cradle, Clara and Eli sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. The same stars she'd stared at that first night, wondering what she'd gotten herself into. "Any regrets?" Eli asked, echoing her thoughts. "Only one," Clara said. He looked at her in alarm. "What?" "I should have asked for better boots. Yours had a hole in the left sole." Eli's laughter rang out across the valley. Rich and full and free. Clara smiled, leaning into his warmth. Sometimes the worst moments of your life were just preparation for the best. Sometimes being traded like property was the first step toward finding your true worth. And sometimes a pair of boots could buy you everything that mattered in the world. As Sarah stirred in her sleep and Eli's arm tightened around her, Clara sent up a prayer of gratitude. For second chances. For love that saw past shame. For the family you choose and the family that chooses you. For boots that walked you home. In the distance, a coyote sang to the moon, and Clara smiled. Not everything wild needed to be tamed. Some things just needed to be understood, respected, and given space to be themselves, like the land, like love, like a woman who'd found her worth in the most unexpected place of all, not in what others thought of her, but in what she thought of herself. The stars wheeled overhead, The baby slept peacefully. And in a small ranch house in the Montana Territory, two souls who'd thought themselves broken discovered they'd simply been waiting to become whole. Thank you so much for listening to this tale from the American frontier. I hope Clara and Eli's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine in the telling. Where are you listening from today? Drop a comment below and let me know. I love connecting with folks from all corners of the world who share a passion for these Wild West stories. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Campfire and share your thoughts. Until next time, partners.